Hey Brij, nice to meet you, and very happy to have you here today for a discussion between your company Nijta and Elimed. So the goal of this discussion is to learn a little bit more about you guys, what you're doing, how it can apply to the life sciences industry, and
Mhm.
um, and make some sort of bridge, between the technology and the regulatory component. Um, so if you would be just able to present yourself, who you are, what you do, and what is your team doing at Nishta?
Hello, Seamus. Thanks for inviting me. My name is Brij Srivastava, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Nijta. So, before jumping into the startup adventure, I was a researcher in my past life. I was investigating the privacy issues in human speech. Uh, To do that, I did my PhD in computer science from INRIA, which is the National Digital Sciences Institute of France. Now, my main mission at Nishta is to work on the commercial aspects of Nishta, to develop it more and take the technology to the market and find use cases. And some of the use cases that we are already solving, data liability issues and opening the data for voice AI. These are some of the challenges that we are facing. And my main objective is to build the strategy, to execute the strategy, and communicate within the team and outside the team.
Okay, great. Before we jump into the privacy aspect and the discussion, um, so we'll be talking about something that is really specific and that has sort of now has more and more importance in today's life because of
Mhm.
technology, and maybe you can touch base on this. But would you be able to tell the difference between noise, speech, and voice, and how those are maybe similar and are very different at the same time?
Yes, so they are all connected in a way. So speech is the spoken language. So imagine written language. We have some kind of orthography, so letters, how we write them. There is a way to connect those letters and make words and sentences, so grammar. And there's a style of writing. So uh, poets or literary people, they write differently than normal people. And similarly, spoken language also has these components. uh, Speech, which is spoken language, it has sounds that are called phonemes. They are like letters, very small fundamental units of sound. Phonology is the way to connect them, and paralinguistic information like pitch, tempo, vocal quality, these are other attributes of speech. On the other hand, voice is the sound of a given person's speech. So this is the biometric information that can be used to identify a person. So this is the difference between speech and voice. Noise usually refers to any other sound uh, other than speech and music. So for example, non-speech human sounds like laughter, crying, etc., and environmental sounds. So animal sounds and wind sound or every other thing is considered as noise when it comes to speech processing.
Okay, great. And so there's one tricky question, I guess, and we'll talk about this a little bit afterwards in the context of medical AI and software as a that is used in those medical AI contexts.
Mhm.
In your opinion, how unique, for example, is my voice compared to yours?
Mhm.
And does everyone have a distinct voice? So, in other words, does everyone has a distinct voice that can differentiate us as a sort of a biometric data?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. So, there is a distinctive quality in everybody's voice, which makes us different and recognizable. Like fingerprints, voice has some kind of biometric component. So, it's biometric modality. That's how you can identify people. But unlike fingerprints, it is not unique. So, a voice of a given person depends on the physiological factors. So, the shape and size of the vocal tract, the vocal folds, which are the organs that produce speech, as well as the speaking style. So these are the factors on which a person's voice depends, like rate, intonation, accent, all of these qualities. You must have certainly experienced hearing a person's voice which sounds exactly like a voice of another person that you know.
Hmm. Sure.
And also voices change over time, so whether involuntarily, so maybe due to cold, due to aging, or even voluntarily, so social and cultural influences, professional requirements, language acquisition, so these may change the person's voice.
Okay, so what you're saying is that maybe somewhere in the world, someone has potentially not exactly the same voice as I have, but very close. That's possible.
Very close. Yeah, it may be possible. Uh, the voice is still produced through a natural organ. So, because of the naturalness of the apparatus which produces voice, it has a very very distinct characteristic. But somewhere, as you said, maybe some person may sound exactly like you or similar to yours voice.
Okay, and to narrow a little bit more our discussion, and I think you see where I'm going with this. Is since we assessed and we outlined that potentially data has something that is not really unique, but that has a component that is really attached to someone.
Mhm.
How feasible is it to recognize someone by their voice, uniquely by their voice?
Mhm.
And maybe the other word to put this. So, for example, today you were mentioning fingerprints, as a ID method. You do
Mhm.
this sometimes on computers,
Mhm.
where you put your finger on the computer to identify yourself. Could we do this through voice? Is that possible?
So, yes, definitely these systems are available. Speaker verification systems, speaker recognition systems, these are very efficient.
Okay.
And if there is also speaker recognition by humans, right? So, humans which know a person personally, so like your parents or your relatives, you can recognize their voice with very high accuracy. If we go to computers,
Hmm.
in favorable conditions, automatic speaker recognitions can be really efficient, and they can recognize a person from just a few seconds of their voice among 10,000 people, or
Okay.
even more, and more
Okay.
with 70 to even 90% accuracy. And when the duration is a bit longer, so maybe if I have a minute or maybe a few minutes of audio and some metadata or some personal data in the spoken content, like if I say my zip code, or if I say my gender, or if I say my age, then it also further reduces the set of possible persons, and then the accuracy increases further.
Okay. Very interesting. So moving on a little bit and towards what you're doing at Nishta right now, because it's really interesting.
Mhm.
Since you talked about the possibility to use the voice as something to ID someone,
Mhm.
and the consequences that are attached to this. Since we're talking, at least in GDPR context, and with what you said, it seems that voice is really linked to the
Mhm.
definition of personal data. So could you tell us a little bit more about your technique, what the technology that you're applying? What I did understand is that there's a anonymization layer that you're putting on it.
Mhm.
I'm using this word carefully because, as you
Mhm.
may know, anonymization is something that is hard to achieve, at least as GDPR standards. So, could you
Mhm.
tell us a bit more about this technique? Are we talking about really anonymization, or is it pseudonymization?
Mhm. So you're right in some respects. See, the notion of anonymization varies from legal framework to another, and you are an expert of this field. In Europe, it's defined in certain way. In US, it's defined certain way. In Canada, certain other way. Uh, but the definition in Europe and through GDPR, it's quite clear in the sense if we read the regulations. Pseudonymization first, I'll explain this. So it's a method where we replace the explicit identifiers in the metadata that a person's basically in the metadata of any data. It can be person's name, it can be person's address. It is replaced by a random identifier so that we cannot map this information to the original person, but it's reversible. And for voice data, it is ineffective because people can be re-identified with their voice with high accuracy, as we saw in the
Hmm.
previous answer. And anonymization, effective anonymization, requires voice de-identification and spoken content anonymization. So these are the two things. Voice is the biometric part, and the spoken content is the verbal content in the speech. What Nishta Voice Harbor does, it can perform either voice de-identification alone, or it can
Hmm.
combine these two steps. So how does it work? It extracts the verbal and non-verbal content from the original speech signal and then generates a new speech signal with the same verbal and non-verbal content, but with a different voice. So it can also hide personal data in the spoken content, which is the verbal part.
So what you're saying, and I'm thinking about this as you're explaining this. It
Mhm.
looks like you're sort of applying a little bit of noise to the
Mhm.
noise, just like differential privacy would do in other contexts.
Mhm.
Is that it?
That's not exactly. We function on the principle of disentanglement. So we try to extract as much as much information from the speech signal, which are like the linguistic content, the prosodic content. So the pitch of a person, the duration of a person, the loudness or the volume in a person's voice, and we try to replicate this in the synthetic audio, but we replace the biometric part. So a
Okay.
biometric part is replaced with a pseudo identity, as we call it. So
Okay.
it's a voice that is imaginary. It does not belong to any real person.
So it's probably closer to synthetic data rather than
It's
the.
closer to synthetic data. We also have in our previous research, we investigated differential privacy, but it heavily degrades the audio quality.
True. Okay. I've heard about this. Well, thank you. That's really interesting. If we move on a little bit forward, have you heard about any potential usage for your technology in the medical context?
Mm.
We've been studying a little bit the topic. We've seen the FDA. So the FDA has published since now I think 2020 a list of all AI algorithms that
Mhm.
have been vetted and authorized.
Mhm.
So there's now close to 900 I think of them. To the last.
Okay.
We've seen also companies, using a voice in order to enhance clinical trials.
Mm.
On the top of my mind, looking at what Winter Labs is doing in Canada,
Mm.
an app called Sunday Health.
Mhm.
Yeah, could you share? Maybe have you experienced? Have you experienced in this field with some of your clients? And yeah, tell us a little bit more about your technology potentially applied to life sciences.
It's it's a really good question because we have experienced it, and it's one of the heavily audited sectors. It's a sector where the voice data or any other form of data is very carefully watched, and it's very sensitive. So it must be protected, and as you said, there are so many algorithms as well to protect it. But in fact, voice data is widespread in the medical sector. If you see, you already mentioned patient doctor interviews. There are also medical emergency calls, there are
Hmm.
pathological voice recordings, and so on. Uh, in fact, voice biomarkers, these are very interesting. They hold the promise of detecting mental disorders and
Hmm.
other diseases earlier and at a lower cost than the intrusive approaches.
Hmm.
So these are some of the amazing technologies, and many startups actually I'm in touch with are trying to do this biomarker discovery. And if you look at medical studies, modern medical studies, they're multicentric. What it means is they rely on the training and evaluation data across multiple clinical centers so that they can ensure applicability, general applicability to all patients. Yet, the GDPR makes it very hard, or sometimes even impossible, to share data across clinical centers, and for good reasons, as you know.
Mhm.
Uh, but contrary to widespread belief, federated learning is not sufficient. It's considered a choice right now to preserve privacy, but federated learning definitely is not sufficient. An AI model which is trained on the data available at a given clinical center, it in fact reveals as much personal information as the training data itself. And then on the other hand, we have differential privacy, which is a rigorous framework of privacy. It severely reduces the model's performance, as I mentioned
Mhm.
before as well.
Mhm.
This is where speech anonymization functions as a cornerstone technology, because it ensures that voice data is free of personal information. And now the clinical data can be shared across clinical centers or with third parties as well, without the fear of privacy violations. And in fact, this technology is recent. So Nishta Voice Harbor is the first GDPR proof solution on the market for removing personal information from voice data. In terms of application, so we have already applied, successfully applied it on medical emergency calls with a company, one of our first customers, Okidoki. And now we are starting a collaboration with the Luxembourg Institute of Health on enabling them for multicentric voice biomarker discovery.
Well, this is fascinating, and I can see, the more we look into this, the more we see indeed, the broad sort of realm of applications
Mhm.
for your technology, and and also for using this part of medical data that has been not really been the focus, I guess, in medical research. So being using voice as a potential, medium to identify pathologies. So it's really exciting. Maybe just to wrap it up, and what are your plans for this year, and and as far as growth and also enhancing your technologies.
So last year, it was uh, basically to validate in the market how what are the market sizes, what are the different sectors on which we can operate, and evaluating the market based on the urgency, based on, because startups always function on low resources in the beginning. So collecting the resources, making our plans to go into the market, which can give us boost in terms of revenue, in terms of because we have so many R&D challenges as well. So we need to boost the revenue to have R&D grants. This year, the plan is to attack the markets where the need is critical, like health, like banking sector, uh, and call centers specifically in general. So we have already made plans to go to some of the events like All for Customer, or there is a nice event in Cannes, and we plan to do some kind of launch there of our product. So we are collecting a lot of feedback from our clients, our early clients, improving the product, trying to take it into the market with high value. And we also have plans to go a little bit international, not very international, but a little bit international. So probably US, Canada, and also around the neighborhood. So Switzerland and Spain, etc. So this year is all about making a bit of growth in the company in terms of commercial, in terms of commercial aspects, and even partnerships, right? So uh, very nice to have Iliumad also recognize us, and probably we can also discuss about ourselves soon.
For sure, for sure. And I think, some of our clients, and as I was mentioning before we start our conversation, already interested in your capabilities and your technology. Brij, thank you very much for your time today. It was a very interesting talk. I love the subject, and I love the technology. The team looks on your side looks great. So very much looking forward to see your future developments. Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure, Seamus. Thank you so much.